unusual for me. Oh, wow, that's scary. Okay. Blocktex. We've been around 5.5 years now. What you can see behind me is our factory in Southeast Queensland, which we've built in that period. So what are we? Blocktex is essentially, we're a clean technology manufacturing company. We don't see ourselves as a recycler. We don't see ourselves as part of the waste business. We're a remanufacturer. Textiles, when they are discarded, are not a waste, despite rumors to the contrary. They're actually a resource. They have huge value, and we can convert that value into other products. And I think it's very important that we stop thinking and using 20th century paradigms to describe a very first 20th century problem. And language is really important. If we describe something as a waste, it remains as a waste in our own mental hierarchy. We have to describe something as a resource, and then we actually value it. I don't see Twiggy Forrest standing in a minehead going, look at all that rock. What Twiggy Forrest sees is steel. And that's what we should see when we look at textiles. Well, not steel, obviously, not unless we're going to start making suits of armor. But we all know, as we have a huge problem. We tend to focus our views on textiles primarily around our own consumption. So we look at the B2C sector and saying we need to solve the B2C sector. Now, yes, that needs solving, but by its nature, it has levels of complexity, but it still needs to be solved. But there's also textiles are everywhere. They're ubiquitous. We sit on them, we sleep on them, we fly on them, we wear them. Half of people in Australia wear a uniform, an issued uniform for work every day. And what happens to all of those? We tend to be quite myopically focused on the B2C aspect of textile recycling, but the B2B aspect is equally important, because those textiles also don't have a particularly happy ending. I mean, no one rushes into their local op shop to buy those secondhand stained bed sheets now, do we? So I think that we need to think about the textile market in its entirety. But the amount of textiles globally, there's 140 million tons last year, textile waste. I mean, it's an enormous number. And there's only 4 of us in the world now chemically textile recycling polyester blends. So there's more than enough cake for us all to eat. This is something I quote often, and it's something we really need to think about, is that we have trained ourselves never to throw a drink bottle onto the beach. We take it and we religiously find a yellow bin and we put our drink bottle in there. But my son's a lifesaver, he's regularly go to competitions, and you find towels, you find budgie smugglers, you find all sorts of clothing left on the beach. Now, that clothing is made of polyester, it's made of PET, it's made of chemically the same material as a Coke bottle. But we don't care about it because, somebody will pick it up, something will happen to it. So we diligently recycle our Coke bottle, but we diligently discard our textiles, which are made of PET. So we have a simple business model in which we essentially have a before the gate business, in which we work directly with clients, and some of them are listed here, where we collect uniforms, textiles, laundries, commercial retail products. My t-shirt, Give a Sheet, we work directly with councils, and we have our Give a Sheet campaigns where we give a sheet for the planet, and we work directly and we collect linens from councils all over the country. And that's really important because we collect and we have direct relationships with our clients. We bring that product into our ecosystem. We have a national carrier, we have a national shredding partner, but we also work with the NDIS sector. We work with the correctional services sector, and we actually, and that sector takes the buttons, the zips, all the bits that can't be recycled because we've designed the garment badly. That takes all of those off, and then we just deliver to our facility a shredded, prepared product of polyester cotton blends, pure polyester, pure cotton, or any man-made cellulosic, so viscose, rayons, lyocells, tencels. We know how to recycle wool, we know how to recycle nylon, but there's no market for us because it's relatively small. Polyester cotton blends will add, and man-made cellulosics will easily be 85% of the fiber mix, so we can recycle all those. So we have this industry before the gate where we collect, decommission, and prepare products ready for recycling. They come into our factory, and we have two patents now. We know how to actually physically separate the polyester from the cotton chemically. It's a complex process. It doesn't involve that many chemicals, but it involves a a combination of pressure, temperature, duration, and some chemicals. But during the reaction, we've also worked out how to neutralize those chemicals back into water. So at the end of our process, all we produce is water, which we then recycle that. So we recycle about 85% of our output. And this absolutely did the head in of the EPA, because they tried to say that you have to have a waste product. Well, we take a product you describe as waste, we don't, and we convert it to high-value raw materials, and we only produce water, which we recycle. So there is no waste, because as we know, there's no waste in nature, and that was one of our guiding principles in block tests. Let's not make a problem for somebody else. EPA, God, that took months to work out how to deal with that. Our current reactor does about 4,000 garments, 4,000 tons of garments per year. We're just building in the space behind my other ear. We're building a second reactor, which will take us to about 10,000 tons a year. We recycle about 4,000 shirts an hour, so 4,000 garments every hour, and that's shredded equivalent. So it's like moving a small car every hour around the process. And then we produce two products. We produce recycled polyester pellets. So we produce pure polyester. That is recycled polyester. We've rebuilt the molecular weight. We've rebuilt the structural integrity of that polyester, and that polyester can go back into fiber. You could make more garments if you wanted to. There's no spinning industry in Australia, and I don't see the point in decarbonizing something here just to recarbonize it by sending it all the way over to Indonesia or Malaysia where there's spinning mills. Our solution will go to those countries. We will license our technology in those countries. So we will take our solution to the problem, at which point it can re-enter the mills. At this point, we produce injection molded geofabrics and other technical fibers in Australia. And the Celtex cellulose has surprised us, because you can wet spin it back into a rayon, well, actually back into a lyocell. But again, that doesn't exist in Australia. So we are working with mills in Europe to do that. Like I think there's a real threat around deforestation to produce man-made cellulosics, but we produce it into what's called a hydromulch, and that is used for land improvement, land reclamation. It's used to actually improve soil yield and even crop yield. So we're doing a lot of exciting work in the agrochemical space to actually say what would have been landfill, what would have just rotted and produced greenhouse gases, is being separated chemically through the block text process, and part of that is used to actually improve soil yield. I think it's more important to feed the planet than clothe the planet. We have enough clothes to last us hundreds of years, but if we can work out ways to use this recycling methodology to actually improve crop yield in an increasingly congested world, I think that's really worth doing. So here's our facility. Here's lots of pictures of men in hard hats, and most of whom are bald, which is one of our employment criteria. If this works, I will be pleasantly surprised. This could be a short video of our factory. Let me see if it works. Maybe it does.
Don't think it's working, Adrian. Not for...
So. Yep, can't see that one, Adrian. It's not. Can you? Adrian, can you hear us? I think he's frozen now as well. I just, do you want to send him a text? Yeah. Okay, we'll just try and get Adrian back. Adrian, can you hear us? No. We'll just get hold of him.
Just while we're waiting. Oh, you're back, Adrian?
Did it work?
No, and you froze.
Bugger.
So we've just been looking
at
you studying.
It's great. You'd have loved it. It was truly fantastic. It's a short video of our facility, and it just shows it generally does work and do stuff, which I think is really important. I think my biggest concern in this space is that there is a lot of there's a lot of good talk around stuff. And then finally, what we do matters in the sense that we have a huge environmental impact. Our estimates say through our LCA is that for every 1 kilogram of 50/50 polyester cotton we recycle, we offset around 30 kilograms of CO2e. Big impact. But also we generate a lot of local employment by our work with Help, Vinnies, working with the Queensland Correctional Services, and we've just announced we're going to announce a partnership soon with the Big Issue Group, employing female workforce. We generate a huge amount of local economic value, and that's truly super important because it gives us the social license to actually engage in our environmental license, and that really, really matters to us. So, in essence, yeah, that's BlockTex. We set ourselves up 5 years ago to do zero textiles to landfill. We're nowhere near doing that. The world's got a lot of journeys to do with us. There's 3 of us in the world doing this. We're very proud of the journey that we're on, and yeah, it's great fun.
Yeah, good on you, Adrian. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. That's fantastic. What we're going to do is just get a few questions, and then we've got we'll go to Stephanie. So, thank you very much. Shannon's asked here, would love to get your views, Adrian, about other cellulose-based products. Interested to learn more if there is time. Any comments on that?
Yeah,
Look,
summarize very quickly.
Jump in, Shannon. Well, what's your question, mate?
Yeah, awesome. So, tobacco filters, cellulose acetate, most leaded item in Australia. So, just wondering when it actually ends up in its format as a waste item or potentially resource. If it's actually shredded, the fibers, can they actually be processed, combined? Obviously, you're not going to re-smoke a cigarette, but we're exploring different options for how to actually recover that as a resource as well. So it might be a separate discussion, but if you've got any provisional thoughts, that'd be great.
I think it probably is a separate discussion. We've had some conversations with CERT, one of our companies we work well with in the US. They started out in cellulose recycling through when they were a different company and have migrated into textile recycling. I think the challenge will always be, and this is something we can take offline and discuss, the biggest challenge we get asked around cellulose is because cellulose has a whole range of applications from, kind of using it as land caps for landfill, all the way up to being the delivery vehicle for pharmaceuticals. So the question comes in around purity, because once you step over a certain level and you're involved in human contact, then all the ball games change. So it's just around the purity of the product, but so it would be the levels of residuals from prior use that would be contained within the product. That's the challenge, some of the challenges that we've had to overcome as well, because obviously we're taking product that's been dyed, and those dye stuffs have to be removed, and it's how you remove some of those sort of not heavy metals in the sense of sort of radioactive stuff, but yeah, they are so its purity is the big issue there.
Yeah, there's only 7,000 chemicals and a bunch of heavy metals in a tobacco filter, so we'll be able to sort it out, I'm sure.
We can fix that.
Thanks, Adrian. It's just so interesting what you're doing. Kate's added a question in the chat as well. I'm wondering if you're the only ones doing this, and can you give us a sense of the scale of textile waste in Australia, and how close are we from being able to recycle it all?
Look, I think the numbers that are quoted by the AFC are, I think they are useful for what the argument they are prosecuting. We talk about Australian landfill, and I find that a little grating, because Australian landfill isn't the only problem. The landfill is landfill, and the greenhouse gases that are emitted everywhere, and then, as we can see through the terrible events of the last 2 summers, either in the northern and southern hemisphere, they have effects everywhere. So the fact that there's 270,000 tons of textiles going into landfill in Australia, that's primarily focused also not on consumer textiles, not on uniforms. And the fact is, textiles continue to be exported, and those textiles are often exported to countries which have don't have the economic means to have strong environmental policies in place. So I think the numbers we have is more like nearly 800,000 tons of textiles that are available for recycling in Australia alone. So yeah, I think the numbers are much bigger than people want to talk about, but the numbers are huge. We couldn't possibly cope with all of that tomorrow. Let's check with my engineers. But I think that what we have to see is that this is a 5-year, 10-year journey to actually get us to that point where we can cope with it, because we have to get to the point that if you want to enjoy the consumption in this country, that's fantastic, because retail, as an ex-retail, generates a lot of work, and I'm supportive of that. But if you want to enjoy the consumption, you also have to wear the costs and pay the price for the recycling, and that has to happen onshore. We can't keep exporting our problems overseas, because it's some kind of fashion sort of colonialism, if I'm totally honest.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to jump to Charlotte quickly. Charlotte, it looks fantastic what you're doing, and I'm sure it is, but I'm sure that some people out there might also have a fantastic looking annual report and deck, but what they're doing isn't really fantastic. It's actually just looks good. And as just a regular punter, how do we dig a little bit below the surface to see who really is doing the right thing, or on the journey to doing the right thing? Because obviously no one's there yet, and who is just making it look lovely.
Well, I can't comment for anyone else. I think there's a couple of things that hold us all to account. Big W personally as a business, and the same for the group. We don't go out and say anything until we've actually done everything behind it to say anything. And so actually, against the market, all the work we're doing in certain spaces, it is infuriating some of my colleagues to look at what is happening in the market and go, well, they've now said that, so why can't we say that? And we're like, because we're just not exactly there yet. Like, we're still kind of finessing a few things, or just being absolutely sure we can put our money where our mouth is. I mean, it's the world of sustainability, and everyone kind of talks to greenwashing. I suppose it's why the ACCC is got so heavily invested in looking at environmental claims and what substantiates a claim. And so any claim we put out in the market in this space, it is backed up by either a certification or a third-party program, or testing, forensic testing if it's origin testing, or all the data to back it up. The rigmarole that stands behind that report, like you said, it might look great. That is months of, we cannot put a sentence with a fact or figure in that report if I cannot show you the data to substantiate that claim. And so I assume everyone else, particularly companies that are as big as ours, has the same rigmarole around it. But let's see where the ACCC goes with its environmental claims.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks, Charlotte. Alison Smith, I might, Alison, bring you into the conversation here. You've got a couple of good questions, and your whole career is in this space, really, isn't it? So do you want to just jump on and just go through those?
Oh, Charlotte, as I said in the chat, your scope 3 gives me a headache. Just going through it with a client of mine. Is there practical advice about how you approach this? Because you can actually, going down the rabbit hole, you can lose months when it's really imperative to get a good, ready impact advice that you can then act on, rather than just collecting data.
Yeah. We're really early on in the journey. So while we've been working on admissions, we knew from a group perspective, our group friends were going to come calling on Big W and go, okay, we want to look at your scope 3 emissions in textiles. We are right at the beginning of the discussions, like you said, to kind of start mapping, and without going down the rabbit hole, we've actually looked at what's available in the market. And there is something called the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. And linked to that, there is obviously the Higg Index that's owned by the technology company called Worldly. And behind that capability, they have a material sustainability index and a product index. And it looks at the type of fiber, where it was grown. You can put it all in there. And they've got kind of the LCA assessments that sit behind that. to try and start mapping your supply chain. So we are literally early doors of looking at that as a solution, so we can jump straight in and go, you know, this is a product or this is our commodity that we want to look at in the clothing and textile space, and taking some, you know, averages that have been calculated through those LCA assessments, what that looks like.
Those tools are really important, aren't they, Charlotte? Because it gets you to move from quantification actually into action. And sometimes companies just get stuck in that quantification phase for too long.
Exactly. And so we're lucky that, you know, that journey that, and it's a global piece. There's all sorts of global brands and retailers that sit behind that Sustainable Apparel Coalition, because they realized that that was a solution, you know, something they needed to solve for. And then it's still not easy at that pace, right? But there are certainly tools out there to lean on to start having, you know, to give you a guide.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot, Alison. Thanks, Charlotte. Okay, we'll just move it along. We've got a couple of other speakers who are just going to give us a brief overview. So very pleased to introduce Stephanie Devine. So Stephanie is the CEO and founder of The Very Good Bra. She started the company in 2018 via a Kickstarter campaign to highlight the perils of fast fashion. And it was launched as the world's first zero-waste bra, a bra so pure you could bury it in the ground after use. And then the company has then gone on to win various awards. So welcome, Stephanie, and look forward to hearing your thoughts. You're just on mute there.
Thank you. I was just saying you've told the whole story now, but I've got a little bit, and I know we're limited for time. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my business, and then also an initiative which has come out of it, which is much more about, again, working towards diverting textiles from landfill, which is obviously the big story. So yes, I launched The Very Good Bra in 2018, wanting to develop the world's first circular economy bra. I started working on it in 2016. And bras are little things, but almost half the population wears one every day, and 99.9% of them are pretty much made of plastic, and they're unrecyclable. So the average woman owns 9 bras, and if we assume that there might be 2 billion women on the planet wearing bras, then that's 18 billion bras headed to landfill. So it becomes a big problem. And the impact on the environment of these synthetic bras, in particular, is in its full life cycle is threefold. So, firstly, creating virgin polyester using fossil fuels pollutes our air. Secondly, one of the huge issues with synthetic fibers and even recycled polyester is that it pollutes oceans through laundering, and microplastics are now in our food chain. And there was some research last week from Rhode Island University about the impact of microplastics on human brains. And then we put this synthetic bra back into the land, into landfill, where it gives off methane gas for another 200 years or so. So I like to think that for every 10,000 bras that we sell, we potentially save 1,000 kilos of toxic bras or plastic from landfill, and 9 kilos of microplastics from our oceans, which was a formula that I found when I was working on my B Corp application. So when I decided on circular, I quickly realized that the bras and undies are intimates, and also they're made up of 9 different materials in very small pieces. So recycling was never going to be an option for the bra. They needed to be botanically circular and effectively compostable, so as clean as a whistle. So I scoured the world to find materials that contained no synthetics, which was actually very hard and took a long time. So I use organic cotton or lensing tencel with no spandex. Spandex is plastic. We use natural rubber knitted into organic cotton for elastic. We use soy ink labeling. We use custom-made organic cotton hooks and eyepieces, and everything is sewn in tencel sewing thread, so 100% cellulose. So yes, the bra is compostable, and it was eaten in a worm farm in the commercial worm farm Worm Tech in 2019 in 8 weeks, which was amazing, and managed to get me on the project. So the bra also composts in a home compost, and as part of my B Corp application, I looked into a take-back service for the few customers in my world who don't have compost or worm farms. And I spoke to commercial composters who liked the idea as long as I had an AS 4736. and said they'd be happy to take them. So I then contacted labs to see if they could test my bras against this AS4736. And they couldn't, because it was specifically for the bioplastic mailers, the Better Packaging Company, all of those things, Hero. So even though we're testing for the same things, which are chemicals, plastics, metals, each Australian standard can only be applied to one material. So I went round in circles for ages and ages, trying to find a way to do this, trying to find someone to do the test that I needed. And then a professor that I know suggested that I just apply for an Australian standard for textile composting. So foolishly, I went ahead and did that. So I rallied around the industry, governments, regulatory bodies, brands, the Australian Fashion Council, Blocktex, Good On You, Joyce, Gecko, everyone wrote letters of support. And the proposal was instantly accepted by Standards Australia. And since then, I've been working with Blake Lingley, who was introduced to me by Blocktex, thank you, on getting this proposal forward. And in fact, last week, we had our first committee meeting 18 months on with a bunch of academics and scientists and the EPA trying to get this together. So in public consultation, the proposal for textile composting had the highest support of any Australian standard to date. And as a world first, it's attracted quite a lot of global interest. And if we can get it right, then an ISO can be developed, an international standard, which is really just about defining or developing a well-defined and repeatable set of tests that ensure the integrity of the output at the end of the process. And this can be used anywhere in the world once it's been done. And it's going to stop people greenwashing, because we're going to say it's compostable because it has the AS. This is obviously important, as everybody said. I've got 600,000 kilos of textiles to landfill every year in my stats, and in the New South Wales local government is committed to zero textiles to landfill by 2030. This is for absolute end-of-life textiles, those stain sheets that are also ripped, we can't do anything with, that are 100% cotton, sewn with cotton thread. And we can keep them out of landfill by potentially making them compostable. So even if it's only 5%, that's 30% or 30,000 tonnes of textiles that we can potentially save from landfill with this Australian standard. So I'm going to leave it there. It's late.
Stephanie, that's just absolutely amazing.
Really.
I'm always so blown away by, we have so many amazing guests speaking, and I just have never really thought about all the different parts that make up my bra, my 9 bras, and where they go when I throw them away, and how they could be done so much better. And I just love that you've led the charge for the Australian standards for textile composting. So I've really definitely learned something tonight.
Thank you.
I'm just going to move on and introduce our final speaker, Kate Gladstone. Thank you so much for joining us, Kate. Kate's the Impact and Partnerships Manager at The Social Outfit, which is a fashion label with a difference. Their focus is training and employing refugee women to design, make and sell original garments, and also to equip them often for their first job in Australia. They're a terrific operation, but also embedded in their approach is ethical use of fabrics and being very environmentally sustainable. So Kate, as our final and lucky last speaker, I'd love to introduce you and hear a little about what the work that you're doing.
Thanks so much, Carolyn, and good evening, everyone. We'll see how my brain works at 9 o'clock at night. I'm not used to speaking to a group at this time, but as Carolyn mentioned, The Social Outfit is a fashion label with a difference, and we exist on a relatively small scale to really attempt to demonstrate what fashion looks like at its best when fashion is able to be circular and to empower the women that make the clothes. As you're aware, likely that mainstream and fast fashion is usually built off exploitation of garment workers, underpayment of garment workers, many working in unsafe conditions, also many bordering on modern slavery. So the social outfit was founded really to address the barriers to employment that refugee women face in Australia, recognising that many refugee women were coming to Australia. They have about an 80% unemployment rate. So only 20% of refugee women are engaged in work. There are many complex barriers, language skills, trauma, maybe lack of local recognition of their qualifications from overseas. But many of these women had long traditions in sewing. Many had worked in factories or maybe worked on domestic machines at home, producing for friends and family. And, you know, the language is in your hands. So you don't need great English to be able to sew. So we started with a very humble store, and in 2014 with just one sewer. We now have 9 sewing technicians, all refugee women, most of them on their first Australian job. The theory of change being that if you provide that first Australian employment, you can then allow someone to go on and build a career. And we do have a lot of fashion brands in Australia right now who are looking for seamstresses, sample makers. You know, the sewing is actually on the national skills shortage list now, and it is one of the priorities of the Seamless report. You know, in amongst addressing textile waste, also looking to upskill and resource the workforce to be able to meet local manufacturing needs, given there's a great consumer demand for local manufacturing. So that's one piece of what we do, is to provide those first Australian jobs. We do it in the sewing room, and we also do it in our retail store, which is on King Street in Newtown. For those of you who are in Sydney, if you ever find yourself in Newtown, please feel free to stop by, and you'll most likely be greeted by one of our young refugee trainees working on the shop floor, who will be, you know, learning how to sell the clothes and everything there is to know about customer service. The other aspect of what we do, which Carolyn mentioned as well, is our focus on sustainability. So there's a few layers to that. Number one, we always try and just produce one size run. So instead of going and producing 10,000 units and then trying to market it and trying to decide whether or not the consumer wants it and then binning it when it doesn't sell, we produce one of every size. And when we sell the small, we'll go and make another small. So that way we're really able to minimize the amount of waste. We also really mindfully design our products in a way that minimizes, so the way that you put your patterns on fabric to minimize the offcuts, the tiny little scraps. We also do save all of our offcuts, like hoarders that we are, or our production manager is a fabulous hoarder. And so we end up with all these little scraps that we then patchwork together and, you know, make the most of every piece of the material. Now, the materials that we use for our clothes are about 85% is industry waste, so pre-consumer waste. So addressing, you know, brands who maybe have over-purchased a certain type of fabric, or, you know, they went, you know, with a particular style and then they decided it wasn't selling, and then they've got material that they can no longer use. So we partner with a lot of the major Australian fashion brands to divert that pre-consumer waste into new clothing collections. So that's a really core part of what we do. It also represents a really interesting kind of creative challenge when you don't actually get to pick your fabric. So we get very small rolls, sometimes 2 meters, 5 meters. You know, we like it when it's 10 plus, but we take whatever we can. And then looking at the fabrics that we've got, the design team then sometimes pieces things together. Again, you know, maybe the arms are a different color from the body, you know, kind of trying to make the most of what we've got. We get some really unusual fabrics. We've got a lot of lace at the moment, very unusual lace, like bridal lace, that we've turned into some sports raglans. So again, kind of an unusual and fun and bold products come out of this design process. So I said 85% of the fabrics were industry waste. The other fabrics that we use are silks. So what I'm wearing right now, this silk was printed through an art process where we would go into schools, work with young refugee students and take them through a creative process to learn different design techniques. So this was collage, watercolor. Sometimes we work with a bit of stitching and textiles as well. And then we'll actually take the students through the whole process of seeing how a textile print is created, so they can learn about, you know, different ways of using creativity for careers here in Australia, you know, in the industry that we work in. And then these prints are a way for us to really celebrate and acknowledge multicultural Australia and all of the skills and strengths that we all have. So there's just a little bit of a snapshot into what the Social Outfit's all about. And from seeing the chat, it's really nice that a few of you have heard of us. Stephanie, thank you. You know, we're big fans of your work as well. And yeah, look, AJ, if you've got some nice quality rolls, although I imagine the stuff that comes to you is the stuff that you really can't save, right? I mean, that's what we should be doing, getting the maximum life, the livable life out of the fabric.
You'd be amazed. We get offered huge amounts of rolls of fabric.
Yeah.
Which are just difficult to recycle. We've probably been, I've probably shifted 6 or 7 double Bs in the last month of rolls of fabric alone.
Yeah.
I
mean, I
a lot.
certainly hope that we can be an example that others can replicate, because like I said, when you're producing, you know, one size run, you know, we can't actually deal with a huge quantity of textile waste. But I do hope that other brands will consider the, you know, using dead stock and using materials that are already in circulation before going.
I've just been found some really good stuff in Sydney, so I'll talk to you about that directly.
Fab. Yeah, I've got your email here, so
yeah, just use it, and you can have it. I don't want it. You can have it.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kate. And I remember talking to you and Camilla about something similar to what Adrian just mentioned, you know, some quite big brands bringing in sample fabric, but not a small amount of sample, a whole roll of sample fabric, and just, you know, what that must cost that business. And then there's a roll of fabric just sitting around, never really used. So I suppose it's about being more thoughtful as well.
Might just a couple of questions. Yeah, I'm glad you've mentioned this. This is Stuart Camino. Stuart, do you want to just jump in here, because you spent a lot of time in with Coca-Cola, didn't you?
Yeah, correct. And look, I suppose just trying to get the maths to work in my head, and I think unless you get a massive change in consumer behaviour at a higher price, I can't see how the value chains are going to align to really solve this problem at scale. So I suppose just a question for speakers. It's been a fascinating discussion. You know, I spent 20 years trying to defend the container deposit. Then I spent, you know, a couple of years implementing it. And I'm a massive advocate, but I just can't see, without some sort of legislative intervention and probably a consumer tax that funds this ecosystem, that we're going to get us, you know, the sort of solution we need to address both the modern slavery and the climate implications of this problem. So just to, you know, I know there was reference, Charlotte, you referenced Tanya Plibersek, and I know Stephanie as well. You know, it feels as though government's going to have to step in here, and should we also be thinking about, you know, what do we do to try and, you know, coexist with that sort of direction? Because, you know, we had the whole of the beverage industry fighting against container deposit for a very long period of time, and government still came in and ultimately did the right thing.
Yeah, that's a good question. Adrian, do you want a quick answer to that one?
Look, I think legislation is inevitable in this space. I really do. I think that what we're trying to ask the market to do is price the externalities of the pollution that takes us, and that's not built into the pricing mechanism. So I think inevitably legislation will come. I just think it's really important that in any EPR scheme, we support EPR schemes. I think there's been enough examples both in Australia and globally where the intent of an EPR scheme is good, but the execution is poor because there's a rush to legislation, as opposed to ensuring that legislation is well thought through. The current seamless scheme, if it was legislated tomorrow, in our opinion, would be a disaster. So whilst I encourage legislation, I think the current seamless scheme is a red cycle for textiles. So I think, Stuart, to your point, I think legislation is inevitable, and I welcome it, actually, because I think it's the only way to fix the issue of free riding. But I think it needs to be judiciously and well thought through before that trigger is pulled on deciding to legislate.
Thanks, Adrian. There was a question a little bit earlier for you, Charlotte.
I'm sorry, I haven't been keeping track.
Oh, that's okay. And Laura, Are you able to discuss or project sales reduction by 2030, referring to new clothing consumption is reduced in your circularity plan?
I will absolutely be very honest and go, we have not modeled that yet. I think, like you said, we need to look at what the solutions are out there, and absolutely. But no, we haven't modeled what that would mean to sales. I think there is also a role that we play, and I know fast fashion has the natural connotations of cheap, but also at the same time, the market is where the market is. Aussies are doing it tough. And so there is that balance of people being able to put clothes on their back and afford them at the right price. We are a discounted department store, but making sure that what we put on the market has and meets all those requirements in terms of designing it right and owning it from start to finish.
It's such a big challenge, isn't it? And I mean, we are all living through this massive, massive change. And lots of different factors coming together. Good on all these companies that we've had tonight and having a go.
But it's also hugely exciting. I mean, it's the best time to live in. And this is the best. Having spent 35 years in retailing, this is the most animated I've ever been, because we're actually doing something really good. And societal behavioral change doesn't happen overnight, but you have to just persevere, because with people like Steph and Kate and Charlotte trying from the inside to change a big beast in it, change happens, but it doesn't happen overnight. But if you stop wanting that change will never happen.
No, I absolutely agree.
It's great way to sort of, that's a great summary here, isn't it?
Yeah, terrific. Yeah. Well, do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you all so much. That's been an absolutely fascinating session. Just before we wind up, we did want to, I suppose, come back to something really topical. As many of you would know, we've had various marches in support of The Voice over the weekend. Stephen and I went to one in Sydney. It was really inspiring, and we actually felt really proud to be there. And it was such an atmosphere of positivity. So we both will be voting yes for a fairer, better Australia and a country that we can be proud of. But we thought we would mention it tonight in terms of the climate as well, because achieving The Voice has got a lot of opportunities to really help us improve and make a positive change in terms of the climate. Amongst many things, it will increase the ability of Indigenous knowledge and practices to help and to raise their profile and to help us use their knowledge and better respect their knowledge in terms of emissions reduction, biodiversity conservation, facilitating respectful consultation with traditional owners, and tapping into their strengths in our ability to fight fossil fuel expansion. After all, they've been looking after our country so amazingly for 60,000 years. So I think we've got a lot to learn from them. So we are really hopeful that on the 15th of October, that's Stephen's birthday. So we're hoping it's a birthday present for Stephen to wake up to a better, fairer and brighter future for all of us, but particularly for Indigenous people.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Excellent. Well, what a great session. I totally agree with everything Karen's just said there. And thanks to all our speakers tonight. It's been absolutely fabulous. So great to hear all the positive stories. And I think your point at the end there, Adrian, just you've got to keep working, got to keep at it. And it's exciting. It is. There's great things happening. So well done to all of you for doing that. And it's very inspiring for all of us to listen to and to support you. Next month, we're going to be hearing from Terry Butler. So Terry was the Shadow Minister for the Environment and Water and the federal member for Griffith up until the last federal election. She now sits on various boards, including as the president of the Smart Energy Council. So she'll be really interesting and no doubt give us a bit of an update what's happening within the federal party as well at the moment with Labour. So thanks again to everyone for coming along and look forward to hopefully seeing you next month as well. Okay, see you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having me. Good night.
Yeah.